Hello, dear friends. Thank you for joining us. Today is a celebration for Xbox fans. Why? Because recently Sony held an event called PlayStation Showcase 2023, where they showcased their games. But not just their own games, they also presented projects from partners, including games that will be released somewhere in 2023 to 2024. And although most of these games will be available on different platforms, the folks from Xbox welcomed Sony on Twitter and congratulated not only them but also themselves, as they have exciting projects awaiting them, such as Ghost Runner, Marathon, Metal Gear Solid Delta, Dragon's Dogma 2, Alan Wake 2, Assassin's Creed Mirage, The Talos Principle 2, Immortals of Aveum, and other indie games from small developer studios. All these games will be available to us as well. There was a special atmosphere surrounding this presentation, as if Sony came out to deliver a devastating blow to Xbox. However, Xbox didn't feel bad about it, and Sony, you could say, showcased the advantage of being multi-platform. Towards the end, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was shown, and the presentation concluded. Thus, there was no significant shift or complete dominance of Sony over Xbox. I would like to highlight that Sony is currently engaged in strategic positioning to achieve its future goals. In light of Microsoft's challenging position after several exclusive releases for Xbox in early 2023, a void in 2022, and uncertainty surrounding the upcoming release of Starfield, Sony comes forward and seems to say, "Guys, we actually have something to show, and you understand perfectly well what we could have presented, like the continuation of Death Stranding that we announced. But we decided not to do that. We feel sorry for Microsoft. We could have shown the Twisted Metal reboot, but why? We feel sorry for Phil Spencer. Marvel's Wolverine from Insomniac Games, we won't show it, just like the remake of Silent Hill 2 or a possible reissue of Bloodborne. The developers of God of War are also contemplating something. Our beloved studio Naughty Dog is working on the multiplayer for The Last of Us, but we won't show it either. Additionally, they have a secret project that we're keeping quiet about for now. Today, we're simply cautiously aiming to be ready to deliver a serious response if Microsoft suddenly decides to stick their head out of the trench. If Sony decides to flood us with releases, no one will remain indifferent. It should be noted that this presentation was a logical and balanced move from the leader of the console segment, who took the stage first. If Microsoft showcases something significant at their presentation in June, Sony might possibly announce another event called PlayStation Showcase. For example, closer to the gaming event, they could reveal even more releases. But why should Sony work at full capacity right now? Why should they aim for the failure of Xbox? Sony hasn't been particularly outstanding in the first half of this year. They placed their bet on PlayStation VR, which, in my opinion, wasn't very successful. PlayStation VR 2 did release and sold 8% better than PSVR 1 in a similar period, but PlayStation 5 is still selling exceptionally well thanks to Sony overcoming the supply shortage and releasing the highly acclaimed game God of War, Ragnarok at the end of last year. And in this half of the year, Sony has experienced a void. Microsoft didn't take advantage of this opportunity, they only worsened their situation by releasing Redfall. Sony looked at this and thought, well, guys, we're not competing with you, but you're undermining yourselves quite well. That's why Final Fantasy XVI and Spider-Man 2 will arrive for Sony at the end of June, and that's enough. PlayStation 5 is now experiencing the snowball effect, where the console sells because it's a PlayStation 5, people buy PlayStation 5 because all their friends have it, because there's Call of Duty on PlayStation 5. It's trendy to play on PS5 because there's FIFA, and everyone plays on PS5. All of this is happening because PS5 is becoming the main and primary console of the current generation. When Sony showcases multi-platform games, they're saying, you understand where the majority of people will be playing this multi-platform game, you understand where the main sales of this multi-platform game will be. Microsoft promoted a similar theme in the days of the Xbox 360 when they heavily dominated Sony. They also showcased multi-platform games in their presentations because everyone knew where they would be played. It's hard to imagine Phil Spencer's expression when Sony showed us one trailer after another for an hour, featuring dozens of different games. For easier comprehension, I have divided the material into 4 categories. The first category is session games that Sony showcases to everyone. They say, alright, in 10 years, you might take Call of Duty away from us, but by that time, we won't have just one Call of Duty, we'll have a whopping 20 session games. Some of them may fade away over time, but some might become popular and will continue to evolve alongside them. Additionally, there's multi-platform, and the majority of games are multi-platform games that will release everywhere. As for exclusives, there's an important clarification. The overwhelming majority of exclusives announced by Sony will release on the same day or with a slight delay on PC. First and foremost, the most painful part of this event is the session games because Sony suddenly came out and said, here are our internal studios, our companies, and our partners developing such garbage with our money. For example, they showed us Fair Games from Haven Studio, the studio that produced the first part of Assassin's Creed with Jade Raymond. It looks like an illegitimate child of crime boss and TikTok. Apparently, it's a game about heists. This game is a product of Ubisoft veterans, and we shouldn't forget that. If you don't control Ubisoft veterans, they'll make the same crap they're making for Ubisoft X Define. Square Enix showcased their exclusive for PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. Now it's no longer next-gen, it's cross-gen. The title of their creation is Foam Stars. As a person who is just starting to learn English, I can't understand how the name of this game is pronounced correctly. It feels like someone spilled coffee on the keyboard, short-circuited it, and that's how the game's name came about. Well, it looks extremely tacky, disgustingly so. When Nintendo made Splatoon, they already understood that the idea of similar shooters with weapons loaded with snot, bath foam, or whatever they had, was strange, and such a strange idea requires corresponding characters and a corresponding world. That's why Splatoon is, in reality, a kind of post-apocalypse with a talking cat and octopus characters. It's a strange world from the start, where all this surreal stuff comes together. Here, anime-like characters are spitting white liquid at each other. Okay. Bungie, our dear and beloved studio behind Halo and Destiny, presented an expansion for Destiny. For some people, it doesn't matter, but Destiny is currently at its peak of popularity, and people enjoy how Bungie is developing the game. But besides that, they introduced a reboot of the game series called Marathon. It's an exclusive for Mac, if I'm not mistaken. It's a Doom-style shooter that stood out back then because of its storyline. This time, the Marathon reboot is a storyless game, a multiplayer project where teams will run around locations, do something, and leave with loot, and that's basically it. Developers promise to focus on the server part, security, and so on. Well, in general, one can easily dismiss it. This project clearly didn't capture the audience's hearts. But we cannot deny the obvious: Bungie makes good multiplayer games. Marathon will be a full-fledged multi-platform game, meaning it will release on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. Well, I think Marathon has a chance to survive because, after all, it's a studio respected in this segment. They also showed a trailer for a game called Concord. The trailer is strange, and nothing is clear. Well, Microsoft has something about the future. They have spaceships, and will also have something about the future in spaceships. And finally, the session game that caught my attention is Helldivers 2. In the name of democracy, kill bugs. What could be better than playing cooperatively with friends? What's happening on the screen resembles something like the Project Starship Troopers, Extermination, which recently launched in early access at 20 frames per second or whatever it was when they showed us gameplay footage. the game worked surprisingly well. Sony showcased a total of 6 session games right away from their internal studios and their partner studios. Alright, let's continue. Multi-platform games were also showcased, and it's worth noting that this multi-platform lineup is interesting once again. These are the games that make you want to play them right here and now. The first game is called Assassin's Creed Mirage. I'm eagerly anticipating it because the developers have stepped away from the grand scale. It will feature Baghdad and its surrounding areas, with a focus on stealth. The trailer reminds me of a reinterpretation of the first Assassin's Creed game. Finally, the foundation of Assassin's Creed as an assassin who hides and quietly kills. The game looks decent, I would even say attractive. Ubisoft knows how to create beautiful worlds, considering that the project was initially developed as an expansion to Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I hope they don't mess it up too much. The game's price is not next-gen, around $50. Overall, it's a solid little project. The main criticism of Ubisoft's sandbox games is that they are bloated, excessively large, and grind-heavy. In that grind, you simply drown. This grind is poorly executed, unskillful, and boring. But with Mirage being a local project, why not? They also showed us Ghost Runner 2, a fantastic announcement. I'm really looking forward to this game. The first part was magnificent. If you want cool platformers combined with action, then you must try Ghost Runner. Additionally, the Talos Principle 2 is a puzzle game set in a fantastic world. I also really liked it, at least in its presentation trailer. Currently, there are very few such 3D puzzle games. Portal 2, the Entropy Center, and now the Talos Principle 2, another great and pleasant announcement, an excellent treat for fans of 3D titles. There were also 3 trailers shown at the event that became a hit. First, they showcased Alan Wake 2. Unfortunately, the rumors turned out to be true, and the protagonist will be a strong and independent dark-skinned woman. More specifically, there will be 2 protagonists, the female FBI agent and Alan Wake himself. The developers note that players will be able to experience the campaigns of each protagonist as they please. This famous nonlinearity is a trademark of Remedy. The game structure may follow the style of Resident Evil 2, where each campaign is separate, or there could be 2 parallel campaigns that players can tackle in any order or switch between. My main question about Alan Wake 2 is regarding the gameplay. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the original Alan Wake. It has a great atmosphere and an interesting story, but when it comes to gameplay, it introduces a mode similar to Resident Evil 4, where you have to illuminate the zombies with a flashlight before shooting them. Sometimes you need to illuminate crazy objects influenced by dark forces, such as combine harvesters or interior elements. Overall, the gameplay of Alan Wake has always been its weak point. Let's see what the second installment has in store. Ironically, it's releasing in the same year as the Resident Evil 4 remake. Another announcement that personally amazed me is the remake of Metal Gear Solid 3. Metal Gear Solid 3 is arguably the best part of the entire Metal Gear Solid series. It serves as a sort of prequel to the whole story. While Kojima has made other prequels and other stories, there is a main series that you need to play. The remake of Metal Gear Solid 3 will be called Metal Gear Solid Delta. The graphics will be updated, but that's probably all they'll do. There are already comparative screenshots on the internet where the developers show how they have redrawn the locations, but they haven't made any changes in terms of game design. Metal Gear Solid Delta will most likely remain the same as the original. Let's see if it will be a worthy part, so we'll see what modern Konami does with the Metal Gear Solid remake. Hopefully, they will also release a remake of Silent Hill 2, which seems to have been announced for this year, but we haven't heard anything specific about it for a long time. And finally, the announcement that I find very important is Dragon's Dogma 2. Capcom has long announced this game, but they have only now presented gameplay to us. The graphics, of course, are not impressive. They have remained roughly the same as in the first installment. However, Dragon's Dogma is the product that was called the Japanese Skyrim. Although it's not exactly Skyrim, it's a fantasy game with a dark atmosphere that had some very interesting ideas. For example, the game featured pawns, which were companions to the hero. They were very intelligent and could provide useful hints. Although sometimes their comments could become annoying. They constantly repeated obvious things like, "Yes, that's a bridge, definitely a bridge, it's obviously a bridge." It was interesting to battle huge monsters and explore locations. Dragon's Dogma 2 is not quite like Skyrim, but it is a Japanese open-world role-playing game with dragons, and it is perhaps the closest game to the highly anticipated The Elder Scrolls 6. We can expect it in the coming years. Moreover, Dragon's Dogma 2 has much better chances of being released than The Elder Scrolls 6, and many of us have a greater chance of experiencing Dragon's Dogma 2 than living to see The Elder Scrolls 6. Of course, there were other multi-platform projects at the event, but I listed the most important ones that deserve immediate attention upon their release. But the most important thing is the exclusives. That's where the real charm lies, because Xbox players won't be able to play them. These exclusives made my heart beat faster, and I realized that as a PC fan, I have an advantage. Why? Because I realized that my favorite platform is the personal computer, and all the games that Sony announced will eventually be released on PC, and some even simultaneously with the PlayStation release. One of the most impressive presentations was the Chinese action game Phantom Blade Zero, which will be available on PlayStation 5 and PC. It's not just an ordinary action game, it's a visually stunning action game with expansive locations to explore. The development is being handled by a studio that previously focused on mobile games, but now they have taken up the challenge and are working with Unreal Engine 5, taking it to a new level. Another impressive game will be Sword of the Sea from the creators of Journey. It is also beautiful and magical, but primarily offers the joy of sword riding, watching the waves and smiling in relaxation. This game will be available on PlayStation 5 and PC. Recently, we were also introduced to a very interesting collection called Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1. It will include the games Metal Gear Solid 1, Metal Gear Solid 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3. However, if this is Volume 1, it can be assumed that there will be a Volume 2 in the future. I noticed that this Master Collection Volume 1 will be available only on PlayStation, although there's nothing stopping Konami from releasing it on PC and Xbox as well. However, a problem arises when it comes to Volume 2. Why is there a Volume 1 everywhere, but Volume 2 is only on PlayStation? This is because Sony acquired exclusive rights to Metal Gear Solid 4 for 100 years ahead back in the day. We were also reminded that PlayStation users will soon have access to the game Final Fantasy XVI in June, and it will be released on PC later in the year. This game is global, massive in scale, and visually stunning, and we eagerly await its release. Another interesting game is Grand Blue Fantasy: Reeling, which is also a JRPG but with more classic hand-drawn graphics. It will be available on PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, and PC. It's not advisable to mention specific release dates for games at the moment, as the gaming industry often changes its plans. An example of this is Microsoft, which promised the game Redfall to be released in late 2022 last year, but as we can see, deadlines can be postponed multiple times. Spider-Man 2, showcased at the PlayStation Showcase 2023, finally concluded the event with its incredibly cool visuals and presentation. It was a vibrant and well-crafted showcase that even Hollywood filmmakers would envy. This is the only PlayStation exclusive that Sony included in this massive presentation. It's likely that this is not a full-fledged game but rather a DLC priced at $70, as you can all see. Nevertheless, it's a logical continuation of the first game with some interesting new features. The game will have two protagonists, Miles Morales and Peter Parker. Peter Parker will acquire the abilities of the Venom symbiote, which will impact the combat. It's likely that Venom will escape from him and bond with another host. The first trailer showed 3 of them, with each representing a distinct personality. Therefore, I believe the story will be intriguing. Peter Parker will acquire Venom, start losing control, and Miles will save him from Venom. Then Venom will attach to another host, and together they will confront Venom. Peter Parker will say, "I can't do this anymore, I'm tired, I'm leaving," and Miles Morales will become the new protagonist of the series. Spider-Man 2 is by no means a revolutionary sequel, it's a calm development of the ideas from the first installment, which is quite logical. The game doesn't introduce revolutionary innovations in mechanics, nor does it amaze with graphics, although it looks beautiful. It doesn't fully exploit the capabilities of the PlayStation 5, as mentioned earlier. However, one can be confident that the project will be technically solid. There will be several graphics modes, which is logical, and all of them will likely work adequately. Regarding Spider-Man 2, it's worth noting that it's not the kind of game that will leave a profound mark on the industry. It won't receive perfect scores of 10 out of 10 from most publications like, for example, The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, or even Resident Evil 4. Most likely, the reviews for Spider-Man 2 will range from 80 to 90 points, closer to 85. Spider-Man 2 won't be the highlight of the Game Awards, and it won't be remembered or talked about for how it influenced the entire industry. It's simply a blockbuster game that will be released and, within a couple of weeks, sell 5 to 10 million copies or even more. Because Spider-Man is something beautiful, and thanks to Spider-Man, Sony will sell not just 1 million or even just a dozen million PlayStation 5 consoles. The most painful thing for the Xbox platform is that this game is specifically created to destroy all prospects of future Starfield sales. As for the state in which Starfield will be released, it's hard to say. Even the biggest optimists probably think, well, maybe we'll have to wait for at least a first-year patch before starting to play, or maybe get the anniversary edition. As for Spider-Man 2, everyone is confident that Sony's exclusive cannot be released in a bad state and will be truly well made. Perhaps Spider-Man 2 might disappoint in terms of its story, as Sony hasn't always excelled in that aspect lately. It might also not impress with an exceptionally high level of graphics, although we've already seen it in the presentation, but the technical execution will surely be top-notch. Spider-Man is a safe and guaranteed successful showcase game, whose task is to present a very enjoyable experience and familiar characters to the general audience. It says, look, here's an epic single-player adventure with Spider-Man, Venom, Miles Morales, everything you want. Play! Here's a PS5 plus Spider-Man bundle for you. Take a look. And there's no doubt that it will work. But will Starfield work? That question still remains unanswered. Even if this game turns out to be deeper than Spider-Man 2 and leaves a lasting impact, we will still remember Starfield for a long time due to the potential problems it may have. In the final section of this material, Sony reminded about the presence of PlayStation VR 2, which surprisingly sells 8% better than the first-generation PlayStation VR over a certain period. They emphasized the importance of operating within specific time frames. However, that alone is not enough if they want to compete with the Oculus Quest 2, which, as far as I remember, sold around 20 million units. Approximately 10 million Oculus Quest 2 units were sold in a year, and now, unlike the times of the first-generation PlayStation VR, Sony has a competitor of that level. When we talk about the success or failure of PlayStation VR 2, we need to pay attention to the projects of the extremist terrorist organization Meta. Sony showcased some projects for users who have decided to purchase PlayStation VR 2. In particular, there was an announcement of a VR mode for the Resident Evil 4 remake, the game Arizona Sunshine Crossfire, and a certain Synapse Beat Saber that will be available on PlayStation VR 2. Unfortunately, the VR version of VR Chat will not be available, so the Sony platform will have to do without the most popular VR project, at least on the Steam platform. Another game will be a port of Five Nights at Freddy's, Help Wanted 2, but it's not the most interesting project. Thus, PlayStation VR 2 will have ports of some games where you'll be able to shoot zombies or terrorists. In addition, we were presented with a portable gaming console called Project Q, which unfortunately does not function without PlayStation. This device works through the Remote Play system. The design of the console evokes negative emotions in me. It seems as if the DualSense was cut in half and a tablet was inserted between the two parts. I don't know why Sony decided to create such a strange device and why it exists at all. Furthermore, Sony partnered with a Chinese manufacturer who liked the design of certain headphones where something pops out of the box. Sony told the manufacturer, "Listen, this is a Chinese product that you produce at your factory and package with instructions. We want the same thing." Sony tried to come up with something on their own, but then went to the manufacturer and said, "Let us copy it." And they agreed, resulting in Sony presenting their own similar headphones, but with the Sony brand. Buy them and don't worry, they will cost much more, about 20 to 30 times more. Interestingly, they may have a special vibration similar to the DualSense to provide a pleasant massage for the ears. But no, that won't be the case. Oh well. In general, the main conclusion from the PlayStation Showcase 2023 event is that PC users who already have a PlayStation 5 don't have any significant incentives to purchase the new console. All games and content are already available to them in one form or another. PlayStation 5 users can be reassured as they have an extensive library of games, multi-platform projects, console exclusives, and PlayStation exclusives. It's important to note that console exclusives and PlayStation exclusives are different categories of games. When referring to console exclusives, it means that the game will be released on PC but not on a competitor's platform. However, those who are Xbox users may be disappointed as they will have access to multi-platform projects and Microsoft exclusives, but we all know that it's not the best choice. Overall, Xbox users should look forward to Microsoft's presentation, especially for Starfield, to laugh and hope that the game will be good. Sony is already preparing for future changes and showcased a multitude of games at the event that may not be interesting to their core PlayStation fan base. It's important to understand that people buy PlayStation not only for Spider-Man and God of War but also for games like FIFA and Call of Duty. It's necessary to acknowledge this aspect and the imagination of the differently gifted. Sony showcased a variety of games and made it clear that they have more to offer in the future. Thank you all for your attention, and that's all for today.